So look, you can't control your thoughts, emotions, feelings, but you can take control, you can take charge of your response to your thoughts, emotions, feelings as you're engaging in your sport or as you're engaging in your business practice.
Folks, welcome back to another episode of What's Next. And as I dropped a few times before, there will be 2 or 3 times a year where I do not do this for you. This is going to be a completely selfish, motivated episode because I have a good friend of mine on the show who we're going to get into his background, but he's a dear friend and we think about things similarly, although he has way more depth on the side of sports psychology, which is what we're going to dial into. He's a past professional golfer, then became a coach, sports psychologist, has worked with the likes of the Australian rugby national team, Gareth Bale, Eddie Howe, and even Aston Martin's Formula One racing team. In addition to that, in his part-time away from that, he's written 4 books, Soccer Tough 1 and 2, which arguably are my favorite, Golf Tough not too far behind, and Soccer Brain. So we're going to dive into all of that. But Dan Abrahams, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invite, Brian.
Well, as we were talking a little bit offline, our audience, current and ex-professional athletes, and they have an awesome range. So we've got pro surfers, pro golfers, pro pickleball players, many soccer footballers to you and I, NFL football players, and at Opportunity Seed, our consulting company, we work with those athletes to help them build their businesses, which is their what's next. And I thought kind of selfishly, given that I played 11 years of pro soccer and made my transition into business, I'd love to get your take on how we use this fierce competitive spirit most of the time on the field and transition that over to business. But before we get there, let's go take a little walk down memory lane. So you're playing professional golf, and how do you decide to transition into sports psychology? Or was it just like, man, I got to do this or else?
Oh, wow. Great question. So you're taking me back in time here. I was a geeky teenager into golf and into sports psychology. Like at 15, 16 years old, I was playing lots of golf, half decent at the game. But I was also really into the psychological aspect. I picked up Timothy Galway's In a Game of Golf. I then, a little bit later, around the time I was turning pro, I picked up Dr. Bob Rotella's Golf is Not a Game of Perfect, which is probably regarded as
now, literally
the iconic golf psychology book or sports psychology book. And as I was playing, I saw some sports psychologists to kind of mixed success. And then when I realized I wasn't going to quite compete with Tiger Woods, I'd done my PGA qualifications as I was playing, so I was ready to go and coach. And as I was coaching, and you know what it's like as a golf coach, you're coaching 40 hours a week and you're coaching different people from different parts of society and a bunch of 8-year-old kids 1 hour, then the next hour the businessman, then the next hour the stay-at-home mum or whoever it is, right, with different ages, different levels. So that sort of experience of coaching people at different levels, different ages, and sort of different roles in society led me to be more interested in the psychological side. And I always had an interest, obviously, from playing the game, and playing the game pretty poorly. So I really had to work on the psychological aspect. So it really built from there. And I was like, okay, what am I going to do? How shall I do this? Should I go off and do a 2-week course? Or do I really, really want to take this seriously? And I chose the latter. So I chose to go off and do a degree in psychology. I was coaching golf full time. I did my degree in psychology because I was advised to do a mainstream psychology degree. And then I did my sports psychology degree and I came to a bit of a crossroads and it was like, okay, what am I going to do now? Am I going to be the golf coach, PGA golf coach with the psych on the side, or should I go full on sports psychology? And about 20 years ago now, I went full on sports psychology because you know what, Brian, I wanted to work across sports. Love golf. Okay. I've always worked in golf, but I wanted to work across all sports. I wanted to work in other domains, business, life, and so on and so forth. So that was really, I charted that course from there on in. So that's been 20 years ago, 20 years now, 2 decades, and it's been a whole heap of fun.
Wow. And you know, the cool thing about that is the recurring theme. We've had a number of guests on And we kind of asked like this idea of the side hustle. I think that's pretty popular in society today, at least in social, like go get that side hustle and do that side hustle. But most of the guys who are crushing it like you are, who really are following their North Star passion, where are they going to go, the purpose in life, are like, yeah, I did that to test the water, but I didn't do 20 years of a side hustle. I just made a decision. I went all in, to your point. I didn't do some 20-hour course. I went and got a degree in sports
Mm.
psychology. And therefore, that's going to be my superpower. And I'm glad you shared that because this this entire show typically is a little counterculture. You know, we talk about hard work, no shortcuts, those kind of things. And I love to hear you say that it is about like go in and be great. I love that. And you're walking the walk, right? I would have to imagine when you're working with guys, and I've heard that Gareth Bale is quite a golfer as well, from my good friend Eric Winalda, who's played with him. Um, would tell you like, yeah, it's great to work with somebody who is all in. Is that what you kind of find among your clients? They kind of resonate with someone who is fully into what they're doing.
I definitely think your passion rubs off on them. I don't think if you're not all in, certainly in my profession, sports psychology, I think if I turn up and I'm not absolutely, I mean, obsessed is a strong word, whether it's the right word, let's go with it. If you're not obsessed by being the very best sports psychologist, if I'm not obsessed by that, being the very best sports psychologist that I can be, then I know I'm not going to be the very best for my clients. And so it's, for me, it's a case of working hard. Yes, absolutely, tick that box. It's also working in a clever way, in an intelligent way. I'm passionate about writing, and I feel that I learn more by writing. So I do numerous articles every single day when I'm not consulting. I write my books, as you've mentioned. So I think for me, it's about working hard, but it's finding the best way that you can learn your trade, continue to learn your trade. It's kind of deliberate practice, if you like, is the term we might use across sports and different domains. So I'm kind of passionate about my craft, but I'm also passionate about engaging in deliberate practice, intentional practice, practice on purpose every single day to be the very best that I can be. So I kind of try to stretch myself in that respect. But of course, I also believe in rest and recuperation. Of course, I also believe in multiple identities. I can't just be Dan the psychologist. If I want to have a healthy, happy life, I've also got to have other things in my life as well. So you're always trying to hit that balance. Whether I hit that balance, I'm probably pretty bad at doing that. I'm probably quite sports psych all the way. But I think trying to be successful, you're trying to hit multiple ways of doing that. But to come back to your point, absolutely. If you're not going to be passionate about what you're doing, if you're not all in, if that's the term you want to use, then your clients aren't going to perceive you to be all in, and that can cause a problem.
Now, I, again, love these like huge value nuggets for the audience here. And I think you're, again, walking the walk. Check out Dan's podcast, The Sports Psych Show. What you will see, what you will hear, and I guarantee you the first 10 minutes of any episode is a guy who you're listening to right now as a question asker, but a listener, right? So that's what I love about your show is I get the sense that you are constantly learning on that show. The questions certainly show that. Your guests bring all this sort of information and wisdom. And I can tell you're not just, well, okay, next question, next question. You're just soaking it in. So it's whether you're writing a book, doing your podcast, preparing for the podcast, I certainly know that one, or actually working with clients, there's not that much disconnect between those things. You're constantly learning and delivering, and you're walking the walk, which is amazing. I guess an easy thing to point out. And I know that firsthand, all things considered, you work with my son, Owen, who's down in Inter Miami right now, who quite frankly kicked me in the butt to do this podcast, not specifically with you, but just in general, to open my aperture to continue this learning, which has been great. And I know that's one of the things he got from you. I'm going to bounce here a little bit. Just when you think about golf, given that was kind of the genesis, there's a lot of us that play that as our other thing. For me, it was my way to be competitive away from soccer. What have you seen, referencing guys like Bratella? You've written a book on it. What can our athletes that maybe don't even play golf or might think about it passively, but take from the golf course, that mental sort of it's only on you mentality? How do they transfer that into the boardroom or business that you'd say, yeah, that is a directly transferable skill?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to give you one word, and that word is control. Now,
Mm.
let me elaborate on that. Um, let's dwell on the golf, but we can think about this from every single sporting perspective, within every single sport. Golf is what the ball does. What the ball does is what the club tells it to do. Okay, what the club tells it to do is what the hands, the arms, the body, the relationship between those, how they move, and they're going to influence how the club works, and then the club is going to tell the ball what to do. The thoughts, emotions, feelings that you experience during the golf swing as you're working your hands and arms and your body, that's going to influence the club, that's going to influence the golf ball. Well, the thoughts, emotions, feelings you're having are going to help or hinder, all right, or they're going to get out of the way and just let you move your body. Um, my fairly elaborate introduction there is very much centered on, as a golfer, you've got to be able to take charge and take control. You really have, and I know you would appreciate this. You've got to be able to take charge and take control. You've got to be able to engage in what I call ruthless routines on every single shot. You've got to refuse to let the shot take charge of you. You've got to refuse to let the club, as in your golf swing, take charge of you. You take charge of you in order to take charge of the shot, to give yourself your best chance to hit your best possible shot, to shoot the lowest possible number, right? But it starts with you. So let's use that word control, right?
Yep.
And I say this to soccer players. You know, I work heavily in soccer, as you know. Had the privilege of working with your son, and it's the same message. When you walk out there between the two posts, your son is a goalkeeper. You've got to take control in order to have your best possible game. So you walk into the boardroom, and what I'm not saying, or you walk into a meeting, what I'm not saying is, you've got to take control of everybody, but you have to take control of yourself in order to deliver as effectively as possible, whether that's a presentation, a pitch, a facilitation, whatever it is you're doing, a challenging conversation with a colleague. You've got to take charge and take control of yourself in order to be the best you that you can be in your given performance moment. And that can be on the golf course, the soccer pitch. It could be on a baseball field. It could be in the boardroom or the meeting. So I think control feels the generic skill skill that we want to have, and that you can learn and you can translate from sport into the boardroom and potentially the office into sport. And there's just one more thing to say here from a nuanced perspective. The interesting evolution in psychology over the last 30 years is, as sports psychologists now, by and large, we would say, look, what we now know about human functioning, what we now know about human beings, is we can't necessarily control the thoughts, emotions, feelings that happen to us. Like, thoughts, emotions, feelings emerge. Our brain is working in milliseconds, excuse me. Our brain is working in milliseconds. A golf swing works in seconds. Our brain works in milliseconds. Soccer works in seconds. All sports works in seconds. The boardroom tends to work in seconds, but our brain is working in milliseconds, throwing up thoughts, emotions, feelings as we're engaging with people or as we're engaging in our sport. So look, you can't control your thoughts, emotions, feelings, but you can take control, you can take charge of your response to your thoughts, emotions, feelings as you're engaging in your sport or as you're engaging in your business practice. And that's a subtle difference. So my job as a sports psychologist, whether it's in the world of sport or if it's in a corporate environment, is to help people engage in self-control, to be the best that they can be in their performance moments, to take control of their response to their thoughts, emotions, feelings. So that one word opens up a whole raft of things that we can talk about, but I think control is a really fascinating area.
Wow. I'm a big note taker. I probably say that every show because I'm sort of looking down, but I've got my Apple pencils. I'm taking notes. I think this is actually a perfect insertion here. I was going to talk about it later, but we work with an NFL athlete, just recently retired, owns a real estate company, also does development. And as I was talking to him last night, mentioning our show here, he said, "How do I take my competitive athlete spirit into these presentations, sales opportunities, whatever?" So I think this is a real life example that's perfect. So if I were to say, I talked to Dan and he said, take control. I'm going to put words in your mouth here. Take control of the controllables. You can't take control of what that energy, that buzz that is happening. We have that as competitors, but you can control the next step. So if you were sitting with them, what would you be saying? Okay, he's going into a sales presentation about developing a large outdoor mall. What would you be saying? It's just sort of like the juices are flowing, man. It's pregame, right? He's feeling it, but he's got to and be a pro now in the boardroom. What do you tell him? I know this is a freebie here, so we're going to pry you for it. What would you tell them?
No, it's a brilliant question, and I'm very happy to give these freebies because I think these are skills and tools and techniques that everybody needs to learn, and they can be as simple as possible, or they could be perhaps delivered on a more complex in a more complex way. Look, I'll actually take you back to a clip I show, because you talked about a client of yours who played NFL. I show a clip to the sports people I work with. It's a wonderful clip taken from a few years ago. I'm not a huge NFL expert, but it's of Aaron Donald, the former player who he's been mic'd up. And it's got him, I think, before one of the Super Bowl finals, and he's talking to himself, and he's talking to himself energetically and vigorously in order to take control, to take charge of himself. And he's talking to himself, as I say, energetically. And there's lots of words that he's saying, and come on, A, come on, A, come on, A. This is your moment. This is your moment. Controlled aggression, controlled aggression, controlled aggression, which I think is, interesting. Those two words, controlled aggression. I'm relaying this story because obviously I'm referring there to the mental technique of self-talk, to talk to oneself. But then the content of that self-talk needs to be applicable. And I think this is where sports people can very much underestimate the impact language has on their ability to compete. And I think day to day, people who function in the workplace, who are in corporate environments, underestimate the impact language has on their capacity to perform in their performance moments, right? So this former NFL player has said to you, how do I take that, competitive spirit? How do I take what I did when I was an NFL player and bring it into my real estate practice? And I would be saying, well, I probably guarantee that you were using some self-talk time to time. There's very few players in that sport, especially, who don't use self-talk. By and large, they all use it. What were you saying to yourself? Let's actually examine that content. Now, when you examine that content, what you find is that they're often using action-based words, things relevant for the sporting environment: alert, alive, lively, athletic, relentless, focused, relaxed, calm. Now, maybe alert, alive, and lively and athletic aren't necessarily that relevant when he's trying to sell real estate. I don't think anybody wants him to start doing cartwheels or somersaults or whatever when he's in a sales process for a piece of real estate. However, these action words are critical. What we know from neuroscience is that the language centers of our brain are attached to parts of our body that deals with our heart rate, our hormones, the hormones we release, which ultimately influence how we feel. So when we start to talk to ourselves, hey, calm, focused, words like that, then we can teach ourselves to relax and stay focused and be in the right mindset, or a better mindset, with relation to what we deal in that environment, that sales environment, if we're talking about this NFL player. So self-talk in the language one uses pre a sales meeting, pre-meeting up with a client, pre-showing a piece of real estate, whatever it is absolutely critical. He can take that self-talk, he can take that language, make it appropriate for his environment, and go out and use it. There's no question that in that performance environment when he was in the NFL, he would have been using his body language in order to impose and assert himself on his opposition. Well, again, he might not want to tower above somebody and look like he's imposing himself in an aggressive manner when he's selling a piece of real estate, but he might start to become more aware of his body language and how that influences the conversations he's having with his potential clients or his actual clients. So there's that as well. And I think the final thing to say, because you hit upon this phrase, control the controllables, for him to have specific attentional cues, there's no question that when he worked with his coaches in the NFL, they would have been giving him tangible, technical and physical cues that he would focus on, just like a golfer would have swing thoughts or feelings throughout the swing, right? He would have these tangible, technical or physical cues. Now, he can have these attentional cues in his sales process. So what he needs to do is strip back. What are the specifics and the controllables that I want to focus on that are going to give me the best opportunity to make my sales points or to engage in a conversation in an appropriate way with this specific client. So all of these mini techniques that he would have probably used and learned while he was playing NFL, absolutely, they are so relevant for his real estate practice. They really, really are. Ultimately, let's come back to control. I want to take charge and take control of myself. I want to be as mentally flexible and as skillful as I can possibly be in order to deliver for my client in this moment. And that might be getting information across. It might be dealing with a difficult conversation. These are all performance moments, just as he would have had performance moments when he played for his team in the NFL.
Man, that is so good. I mean, there's a masterclass right there. And you hit on something really important that we see with our clients. And again, mostly our clients have come from this environment of pro sports, and most of them in team. I mentioned a couple of surfers who are surrounded by a team. It's no longer individual. You know that as a pro golfer. There's a team of people. That you mentioned, a coach would have told this player, focus, do this, get in there, give him tools that he knows works. The cool thing about being an athlete is you also know that you've tried some stuff that you failed miserably, right? If you're a D-line guy and your job is to, wrap up the running back who's coming right at you, and you thought you had controlled aggression, but it got over your head and you completely whiff on a tackle and the guy goes in the end zone, you're in front of 65,000 people going, oh shit, it just got me, right? So I think we get that test. And I love your take on this. And to go a little further, would you say, because I was kind of taking this out, is it have the end in mind so that you can control that pathway? Because I think sometimes we just like, okay, I'm excited. Whew, okay, be cool. But it isn't, you don't have a focus on it. At the end of the day, when I walk out of this room, I want to make sure my message was clear. I've conveyed there is a sales opportunity. I don't need to close this deal right now, but I want them to have the information. I'm kind of making up that scenario. Yeah. If I know that the end in mind and my heart is pounding and this guy's 6'8", right? I don't need to walk in and tower over anybody, but I do need to be strong and firm, believable, and trustworthy, right? And I think our body language can do that. So are you saying also have the end in mind so that when you're working on that controllable, you know where you're going?
I think it's a really, really accurate thing to say. I think as you're speaking there, it's making me think, if I was to simplify this and perhaps ask people listening in to picture a graphic that might bring this alive, I think of outcome, performance and mindset. Outcome, performance and mindset. And if we're thinking about beginning with the end in mind, we might think about what outcome we want, and that might be as simple as, well, I'd like to win, right? Performance-wise, we might consider the performance, and we're talking sport here, but I can imagine people listening in can translate this to their business world. We might think about the performance that we want to engage with, and that might, you might relate that to performance data, or you might relate that to performance behaviors, performance actions, right? And again, begin with the end in mind. Well, what does that look like? What does it look like if I engage in the kind of performance behaviors, the performance data that I want to execute? Again, nothing wrong with that. That's brilliant. But then you've got to ask yourself a question. How am I going to make that a reality? What have I got to do to give myself my best shot to have my best possible performance, which gives me the best chance of the best possible outcome? And the word possible, I think, is really, really important here, because ultimately what we now know is obviously we can't completely control the outcome. This estate agent can't necessarily guarantee that they're going to make the sale, just as an NFL player can't guarantee that they're going to win the game. So look, we can't completely control the outcome. We can only be a part of the cog that influences that. But I think the interesting relationship that sports people and maybe business people have is their relationship with their performance. And this is often what you find as a psychologist in sport and business, is the relationship people have with performance so often makes or breaks their performance. Like so many people, because in the Western world, like you're American, I'm British, right? We tend to live in this sort of socio-cultural filter of got to perform, but you got to want it. It's the will to win. It's the will to win. And there's nothing wrong with having some of that ambition, motivation, commitment. All of that is important, and I don't deny that. But performance, especially in sport, is far more subtle than that, because what we know is when we heap piles of pressure on ourselves with relation to performance, when we try to force performance, we tend to tighten our muscles. We tend to create anxiety, what we call cognitive anxiety in our mind, right? Somatic anxiety through our body. And so subsequently, that will to win can often be to the detriment of our performance. And so for me, a sophisticated relationship with outcome and performance is very much this narrative around, look, I know I want to win. I'd very much like to win here. Okay, that exists. Park that. So then what? I know I want to perform very well, right? What does that look like? What does that feel like? What will others see? What behaviors are here? What data is here? Okay. Now, what have I got to do? I can't force that, because the more I force that, the worse I might play, or the worse I might perform in my performance moment, in the office. So then it's asking yourself, what is that mindset process? What actions am I going to engage in that are controllable? Is in, how am I going to hold myself? How am I going to present myself? How am I going to respond to an objection? What specific cues am I going to focus on? What self-talk am I going to evoke here? So all these many things. What language am I going to use? What cue words am I going to utilize? This is the mindset process. So this notion, which I love, of begin with the end in mind, absolutely nothing with charting your course there. But then you must, in my opinion, strip it back to, right, what is my mindset process? And please, when I say mindset process, one of the biggest myths in psychology is this notion that psychology is from the neck upwards. What, again, we preach more of now as sports psychologists, especially sport and performance psychologists, is that psychology is from your head down to your feet up to your head. Psychology is how you present yourself to others and how you present yourself to yourself. Psychology is your action. Psychology is your motion. Psychology is your movement. Psychology is embodied and enacted in your competitive environment. So that's where I say mindset process incorporates the behaviors, the actions, the styles in which you want to enact what you want to do, that then feeds into your performance, that then feeds into your outcome. Begin with the end in mind, strip it back to the process, and then really, really get that process right. And then, if I may say, engage in feedback loops after your performance around that mindset process. If it doesn't quite work out for us, that's okay, that's fine. But now we have to analyze, we have to reflect on that mindset process. What went well, what can go better next time? Because then that feedback loop helps us be better for next time. So we invite in a better performance and potentially a better outcome.
Man, folks, that's a deep view, but honestly, like, hit pause and go back and listen to this again. I brought up a simple topic of going into a sales pitch, and Dan just gave you the details. I mean, the real details of it isn't the end in mind. Like, that was my term, which is a scoreboard. I'm used to that. as a goalkeeper, my hope is it's a 0. I can't control deflections, missed offside calls, and quite frankly, a lot of other things, but I can control my actions. I can control my preparation. I can control a lot of those things. And I love that you went in depth there because it's so transferable. So if you take that from what you were doing on the field and you apply it to a business situation, a relationship conversation, an interview with a partner or a possible new employee, I think you're going to find the same thing, is actually look at the process. I love this being purposeful. I know Jim Laird talks about it's in your face. He uses acting, you say action, but it's a full body. Like you have to convince your brain with your body that this is the way it works. I love that sort of, and then adding in feedback loop is certainly one of the important things. We're huge fans here of experience, not opinion. And I think that's exactly what you just did, is to give this experience of what is working in the world. As our guys start to transition into building businesses, oftentimes it's, okay, I've got this. I can bring this transferable asset that I had as an athlete, but I was always put on a team. I didn't build that team. A general manager, whoever was doing that. How do you take that next skill and go from I was the guy who was put on a team to now I'm building a team using the same idea of mindset?
Oh, big question there, Brian. Thanks for that. Yeah. Where can I go with that one? Recruit as good a people as you possibly can, for starters. I mean, that's absolutely critical. Look, I think your capacity to lead others lies at the heart of this. At least that's my interpretation of this. There's so many different directions we can go in, but I think once you've recruited the right people, you've really got to be able to lead. Now, I would, maybe what I'm about to say could be considered controversial, because what I do know is you can go online, you could Google leadership, and you're going to get 2 trillion data points back at you. Okay, you can go on a good online book retailer and find thousands and thousands of books about leadership. I'm writing about this at the moment for my next book, and I'm trying to break it down for sports people to keep it as simple as possible in terms of being a better leader. And I think sometimes for sports people, the term leadership, leading others, can actually be quite intimidating, because it is so broad and because it is so deep. So it's like, well, where do I start? And then when you ask that question, it's kind of like it's too de-energizing, it's exhausting. So I actually
sorry to interrupt, but don't you think it's because as athletes we come from, like, who am I to say, right? I'm only in charge of myself. I'm only the guy making the tackle. I'm only the guy making the save. But in reality, it is a bigger concept, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. And I thank you for that, because I'm going to use that as a prompt to take you down a path here that I think is a really interesting direction to go when it comes to leadership. But let me give you another term here. So leadership is influence. Leadership is influence. Now, leadership experts around the world go, oh, shudder and go, it's more than that, isn't it? And I'm sure it absolutely is. But if we're going to strip it back, because, people need things stripped back for them because we have busy lives and we can't be experts of everything. Leadership is influence. Be an influencer. How do you influence? This is absolutely crucial. And let's play with what you've just said to me, because I think it's really important. The biggest killer of influence, whether it's in sports teams or in the workplace, for those who find themselves in leadership positions, you know what the biggest killer is of the capacity to influence? It's this. It's ants. 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 Ants are the biggest killers of influence based on what you've said, as in, now, I'm playing with this. I'm having some fun here. ANTS is an acronym that I use all the time with sports people. The A stands for automatic. The N stands for negative. The T stands for thoughts. I know you know about this because I know you know about my work, right? But it's true, because the vast majority of our anxieties in life are social anxieties. Because, borrowing from evolutionary psychology, a fair hypothesis about how we are designed as human beings and how we function is based on striving to get along and get ahead. For the last 200,000 years, that's been at the core of our behavior, right? We've got to strive to get along and strive to get ahead. Okay. So that's always influencing us. So we can, a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us experience ants, automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings as a consequence of social anxiety. Anxious ants, anxious around what other people think of us. What will people think of me when I try to tell them what to do? Right? When I try to influence them, that turns up the volume of ants, creates an ant farm in our head, and then we get nothing done and we can't influence. So, but here's the interesting thing. There's lots of ways to influence, and it's undoubtedly a way to influence is to tell somebody what to do. Undoubtedly, a way to influence for the people that you are leading is to create borders and boundaries and lines, and a part of that, a softer side of that, is values and mission statements and so on and so forth, and principles, and all those things are really, really important. All those things are great. But maybe if I can add some value here, that maybe what people don't always consider from an influence, from a leadership perspective, is the importance, and I'm going to really be a psychologist here and put my psychologist cap on and talk about autonomy supportive leadership. Autonomy supportive leadership, or autonomy supportive influence, is suggesting, think of that, those terms, to be autonomy supportive. What we now know from 50 years of literature, research literature on motivation, is people tend to be motivated from when you give them autonomy. And, when you give them the platform to make decisions for themselves, when you give them choice, when you give them that bit of freedom. Maybe you can't give them 100% freedom, but you can give them that bit of freedom. You give them the choice and so on and so forth. So how do you do that? You have conversations with them. You ask them open questions. You give them the opportunity to give you their experience, their viewpoint. You try to help them come up with the choices and the options that they have, just by simply sitting there, asking questions, listening, asking for their opinion, reflecting back what you hear so that they can hear themselves accurately, so that they can then start to choose between their own options, making suggestions yourself within those options. That, to me, is how to be a great influencer, is to be able to ask the right questions, to reflect back what you hear, to give people the choice of their own options, to make suggestions yourself. You can influence massively there, and then to hold them accountable based on what they've come up with. Wow. So you don't have to necessarily tell somebody what to do. Your people are good people. You've employed them for a reason. So, you know what? Evoke from them the answers and then give them the opportunity to go and do it by holding them accountable. And then the feedback loop can ensue. Yeah. So to me, that influence lies at the heart of this. Being autonomy supportive feels a soft but powerful way to influence your people. Engage that way. And it also turns down the volume of your own ants, automatic negative thoughts, when it comes to social anxiety, when it comes to your leadership.
No, that's great. And again, I'm going to reflect back on folks. This is super intentional planning, right? And so the reason you do that is it's not to become an automaton. The job's not to become a robot. It's actually to create space to be free to do. And that's exactly what Dan's talking about here. I wrote down be intentional. You use the word platform. We use the word playbook when we're helping these athletes form their businesses and coaches that are forming their businesses. We do try to tap into a lot of those skills that have already been developed. We don't want them shoving them in a trunk and locking with a key. So, taking that lineman again, it's like you have a playbook that you're to follow. How you're going to block that guy for your running back is up to you. Do it the best you can, but your job is to follow the playbook and then go do your job. The fun part is go do your job. And I think that's exactly what you're saying is once you give them the framework, then let them do their job. Let them have the ability to have the freedom to go do it how they are going to do it. People love that kind of thing. And at the end, you're holding them accountable. Did you get where we thought we were going to go? And there ensues the feedback loop, right? We love that. We love that as athletes. We don't get better without it. It's also called coaching. Most of us love it. And I think then you come back again. Okay, coach, boss, what's the playbook? And as leaders, owners of these companies, I love this because, like, again, folks, this is selfish for me because this is my takeaway, is to make sure that it is not a straight line linear. It is a circle. So as you develop your playbook, you engage them, you talk to them, you sit with them, give them the objective, hold them accountable, create the feedback loop. Guess where you end up in the beginning? Talking about it again in its next iteration. I'm not sure there could be much more fun in business than doing that, because you go from player to coach and you're in business. I mean, kind of nirvana for me, the way I look at it. But Dan, I love that you say those things intentionally. A couple more things I do want to get to. So we're building our teams, we're leveraging our strengths as athletes and regulating, if I'm using my word, emotion. I wrote down a couple of things that, leadership is influence. You talked about actions. Brad Friedel, world-renowned goalkeeper in the United States many years, was on the show a little while ago, and he spent a lot of time talking about how they identify players. And his thing was, I want to see how guys create their ability to rest and recover. And we liken that when Brad and I were talking about it, because he's now got a sports agency. He's in charge of a very large club in Turkey. He himself needed as a player, and now he sees this ability to recover, to rest, to avoid burnout. Burnout can be physical for sure, but I'm sure you've seen it in athletes. I mean, you're a business owner as well. We talked about this with you writing books. What's maybe like my clutch go-to, or that you've seen work maybe the most? I know there's not one answer here, but is there sort of a good go-to that you'd say, here's how you avoid burnout? Because like anything, you said this, you got to have the passion. You got to want to do that. You're all in. It can be just talking to Owen and is working with his brother, Josh. Like, we stayed up until 3:30 in the morning working on this website. We're going to help. It's like, you just can't do that every day. So how do you build that in? So yes, there's the physical component, but the mental component as well, to avoid that burnout.
And before I answer that question, our relationship's going to get even deeper, because I've got a book coming out early next year that is all about athletes creating a mental playbook. So It's so funny that you've said that.
Well, we're once it comes out, we're adding it to the show notes. We promote everybody's stuff because, in experience, not opinion, I said I'm not a writer and you are, and your stuff is phenomenal. So it's going to be in the show notes. I can't wait to add the fifth one, but please go.
That's very kind of you, but that did make me chuckle when you said playbook, because that's the term I'm using, or I'm pretty sure my editor's going to be happy about, my publisher's going to be happy about me using. Fantastic question, so relevant, because you know what, I find it every single day. I've got here in the UK, but globally, because I get the opportunity to work globally with players. So many players will say to me, I feel exhausted. There's so much burnout out there. Again, if I come back to that socio-cultural landscape in your country, in my country, I suppose across the Western world, and maybe across the globe, this notion of gotta grind, gotta work. And I have no problem. I write about this all the time, the grind, in as much as I always do wonder about this word. And I mean this as respectfully as I can be, because I think undoubtedly, if you want to get good at something, you've got to practice it a lot. Nobody denies that. You've got to have an extraordinary amount of practice, and effective practice as well, right? But ultimately, the challenge is we live in this culture where we say grind, and it celebrates that, and it doesn't necessarily. It feels very uncool to have a social media meme that says rest and recuperate, and have somebody falling asleep or something. That just doesn't seem to exist. It's not cool, but. The reality is, I agree with Brad Friedel. I actually would suggest that your capacity to get away from your sport, and I think this is going to be my number one piece of advice, as simplistic as it is. I've got two pieces now. If I think about it, you've got to get away. You've got to find, if we're talking about sport, I'll come on to business in a second. If we're talking about sport, you've got to give yourself space away from your sport, where you're substituting thinking about your sport for something else. You've got to, that's the number one thing here, because what you tend to find, I've had so many people over the years who, when you ask them questions about this, because they are burnt out, they are tired, they're not improving, they're plateauing, and they're very, very good elite players, professional players, it's because they train, they do their gym work, they have lunch, they go home, if you like, and then they're thinking about it all afternoon. And it's like one of the things that we can say, or two things we can say about that is it's very likely that the brain and the nervous system can't tell the difference between what's real and what's imagined. So when you're thinking about your game, you're actually depleting your stores of adrenaline. The other thing we can say is when you're thinking hard about your game and you're evoking anxiety, you're depleting your stores of sugars and glucose, which sustain your energy for your brain, right? So you're exhausting yourself that way. And these stores deplete. A very interesting dynamic here, I can say, certainly in English soccer, is that very, very many players will say to me, Dan, when it comes to kickoff at 3 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, I'm knackered. I'm exhausted. What's going on? I don't, I'm eating well. I'm getting my sleep. And then when you unpack this, it's that they've woken up on Saturday morning. They've been thinking all morning about the game. And again, they've depleted their stores of adrenaline and sugars and glucose, and so they're tired come kickoff.
This is not talking about 12-year-olds burning out. These are English Premier League players, NFL players, guys and gals at the top of their game. So don't tune out thinking, oh, well, I don't have a 12-year-old and I'm not going to put them into burnout mode. This is for high-performing world-class athletes and world-class entrepreneurs. So take note here. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's worth noting that it happens at the highest levels for exactly what you're saying.
No, Brian, I mean, let's come back to Brad Friedel, who played at the highest level. He is 100% spot on. The quality of your rest and recuperation is as important as the quality of your training, the quality of your practice. That is absolutely true. And I am as invested in as Brad in high performance sport. That's what I do. You mentioned my podcast earlier. We have over 300 episodes of some of the world leading thinkers from academic, skill acquisition, sports science, sports psychology, sports coaching. It's cutting edge stuff. I'm a distinctly average host, but I have wonderful guests, and so yes, I am invested in the gold medal. I am not for the 12-year-old kid, but for the adult player. I'm invested in the Premier League win. I'm invested in excellence. But you can't have these without effective rest and recuperation. So you've got to have substitutes. And this also comes under the literature of athletic identity. Too many players at the highest level of sports, and again, we're talking about highest level, foreclose their identity. They become, I'm John the footballer, Brian the soccer player, I'm Pete the golfer, and that becomes their identity. And so their emotions are solely tied. Their thoughts, emotions, feelings, their behaviors, their actions are tied to that. Their moods go up and down based on that. Now, there's always going to be an element of attachment to your sport if you are a professional player, of course. And part of being a professional player is the capacity to deal with the uncomfortable, deal with big losses, deal with serious disappointments. Let's not take that away. Let's not take that off the table. That exists. But a part of that process is to be able to engage in multiple identities. Like, I love the fact you're saying, your son is building websites. As you say, maybe you don't want that at 3:30 in the morning if he's got to get up for training, but
he had the day off the next day.
Okay. But that's fantastic that he's got multiple interests. That is the next thing here. So, give yourself permission to get away from your sport. Have substitutes that links in with multiple identities, have other things. You have to, if you're at the top level, you just have to give yourself permission to have other things, and understand that fuels your ability to compete. That's so important. And then my final bit here on the sports piece is to squash your ants, your automatic negative thoughts, emotions, feelings away from your playing environment and your practice environment. Close out your practice for the day by asking yourself in the car on the way back or the walk on the way back home, what went well? What can go better next time? Is there anything I need to start incorporating? Do I need to have any conversations with my coaches? Once you've done that analysis, that's it for the day, or that's it for the evening. Be able to have that reflective practice to close out that that, and then move on with the rest of your life. In that way, you turn down the volume of ants, you squash your ants in the afternoon. One more small thing here, if I lean over more towards the business side of things, it's not that that stuff's not irrelevant. It's just that what we know in a corporate environment, as I know you appreciate, is your challenges come thick and fast. You can tend to have 10 to 12 hours days. And the reality is, lots of people would say, but I don't have the time for anything else. And I think that would be a fair thing to say. So I'm not going to sit here and say, well, you should be taking hours off. But what I would be saying is this, is that if your day consists of 10 to 12 to 15 performance moments, the Zoom call, the pitch, the meeting, the facilitation, your day you have a whole bunch of performance moments, right? You often have short in between moments. Make those your well-being and your mental health moments, even if it's a minute. Never underestimate 1 minute of well-being, and that could be 1 minute of deep breathing, 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, some heart rate variability stuff. It could be listening to some music for a couple of minutes. It could be getting a glass of. Don't underestimate that, because again, let's come back to the science. You are taking care of your brain and your nervous system when you do that, and when you do that, that can accumulate. And it's kind of the invisible side of well-being that you can manage and improve upon in order to feel a better general mood overall over a longer period of time. So I would always say, schedule in your well-being moments and don't underestimate 1 minute of well-being. I think that's crucial if you're in a corporate environment.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's a good culminating moment here, because my challenge to maybe what you said there a little bit is, for someone who says they're too busy, I would say bullshit. And so, because we spend a lot of time, again, our clientele is athletes and high performers. So we spend a lot of time that sounds like a badge of honor. And I'm going to liken this to what you said, that it's about the quality when you get away from your sport or your business. I think interchangeable, honestly, whether you're a high performing English Premier League player or you're running a business, the stresses can be the same. From my experience, I did not look at quality. So when I got away from the game, it sometimes involved alcohol. It involved things that were not productive for my rest. And I came back to the game thinking I got away, which was drinking beer all day on a day off and watching NFL or something, only to arrive exhausted on Monday or Tuesday for training. And I mean, this coming from a goalkeeper, so probably doesn't surprise many people, but it's like, why am I exhausted? Because I didn't take quality time. Not until I started going fly fishing, when I'm in California, going surfing, out on the golf course. Quality time away then was rejuvenative. And it's like, oh man, I arrived back into business or sport, like, let's go. I could crush it. So I love that you said quality and taking those performance moments as a sort of balance in your bank account. You had 10, 12, 14 of those. Make sure on the other end, that's why I'm challenging a little bit, like, prioritize the stuff so that you can get really quality. If you have to, get your snacks in of time to recover, but be intentional about it, which I love. Dan, this has been awesome. I mean, again, I'm taking away a bunch of stuff. You are on, as you know, my SEAL Team 6, which for our clients, they know we have guys like you. My ask is, this is the first of hopefully many. If I can twist your arm to come on the show, there's so much we didn't cover. You and I talked about a host of things we could go down, and I feel like we only scratched the surface. But folks, if I would do some summarizing here, it's that let your body actions be part of what you're projecting. Be really intentional about what you want. You heard from Dan, like we went into deep topics, and even just a sales pitch, it was about where do you want to end up, but more importantly, how are you going to get there? I thought that was super helpful. And, burnout is not just kids. At the end of the day, we're certainly more susceptible to it, because if you scroll any part of social, what you're going to hear is work, 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 grind, 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 keep hitting it. Don't give up. There's extra hours in the day. After the kids go to sleep, keep going, wake up early. And you go, man, wow, it's exhausting. So I think making sure you plan around that is great for your mental health. And it's actually great for everybody else around you. And if we're not in this to affect the families and those around us, then kind of why are we in it? So Dan, thank you for being on the show. For people that want to find you, we're going to have it in the show notes, the Sports Psych Show link down there. But where else can they find you? And can you give us a little tip off of when we might be seeing book number 5?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. Firstly, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you, Bryan. It's always a pleasure. And this is, I'd be delighted and honored to do it again.
Wonderful.
Hey, look, if you want to find me, danabrahams.com is my website. That's the obvious place where it's got access to all the books and things like that. I write every single day. I probably write far too much. I'm far too geeky with this stuff. So do check me out on LinkedIn, Daniel Abrahams or Dan Abrahams. You'll find me there. I think I do 5 posts a day on LinkedIn. I do 24 posts a day on Facebook. They're on the hour every hour, and they are sporty. That Facebook is at Dan Abrahams Soccer, Instagram at Dan Abrahams Sport, and X. I've got a few accounts, but my main one is at Dan Abrahams 77. And the Sports Psych Show, as you said, is the podcast. So look, thank you so much, Bryan.
By the way, guys, there are a lot of free resources out there. Subscribe to those. Dan's writings are very intentional. I fell in love with his writings before he was working with my son, Josh. Just honestly, they were for me. It was just a way for me to take this competitive spirit and find a way to channel it for good. And, you know, Dan, I've kind of shared with you, but officially I will, that it's helped change my life. Like really, I get emotional thinking about that, you know, part of my cancer journey, and just it tapped into my deep athletic competitive spirit and finding those ways. So folks, it's free and it's awesome. And it's something that is a gift to you. So Dan, you've been a gift to us on the show. Thank you so much. Folks, if you like what we're doing, please hit the like button, subscribe. That's how we get to meet more people who have questions for Dan. And again, we're going to have him on for many shows. So Dan, thanks so much. And folks, as always, we add an exclamation point at the end of this for good reason. It's about excitement, and we want to know where you're going next. So please keep us informed on what's next.